The galaxy was vast, stretching across endless stars and countless planets. Yet, for all its size, it was silent. The great civilizations, advanced beyond what humanity could ever imagine, lived in peace, unbothered by the struggles of those less powerful. But even in this galaxy of giants, trouble was on the horizon. The deep and ancient threat had awakened, a force that threatened to tear apart entire star systems. No one had seen anything like it before. Across the galaxy, the distress call was sent out, reaching every corner of known space. The message echoed through the stars, a plea for help. It wasn't just one species in danger, it was the entire galaxy. Planets were under siege, and no one knew how to stop it. The enemy was unlike any force they had ever faced, and there was no time to waste. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy received the signal first, their technologies capable of intercepting and analyzing it in seconds. But they didn't respond. The leaders of these alien civilizations looked at the message, debated it, and ultimately decided that they had no reason to act. They were safe. Their worlds were secure. Why should they risk their resources to save others when their own people were untouched by the growing threat? They reasoned that it would be wiser to wait and see if the danger reached their doorsteps. They ignored the cry for help, each one assuming that someone else would deal with it. The message traveled farther, reaching other species that were also advanced, yet too focused on their own power to offer assistance. These creatures, too, had their own struggles and reasons for not responding. They were afraid of the unknown, afraid of losing everything they had built. They saw no value in helping others when their own survival was uncertain. And so, the plea for help continued to echo, unanswered by the powerful beings who ruled the galaxy. But on one small blue planet, far from the center of the galaxy, the message was heard by someone who wasn't afraid. Someone who was determined to help, even though they had little to offer. Humanity, young in the grand scale of the universe, had always been seen as weak. Earth, a small world on the edge of a vast galaxy, was far from the powerful and ancient civilizations that populated the core systems. Yet, humanity had something the others didn't, a fierce sense of hope and a will to act even when the odds were stacked against them. As the other species debated, ignored, or turned away, a group of humans gathered in secret. World leaders, scientists, military commanders, and civilians alike, all drawn together by the same realization. They couldn't sit idly by while the galaxy was in peril. They knew they were not the most powerful, not the most technologically advanced, and certainly not the ones who could stand against the ancient enemy. But they had one thing that none of the others had: the courage to do what was right, even if it meant sacrificing everything. They'd made a decision. The human leaders agreed to send a fleet of ships to help, no matter what it took. The fleet wasn't large, it wasn't powerful. It was made up of just a few dozen ships, hastily constructed, with the best technology they could muster in such a short time. They knew it was a long shot, but they didn't care. They couldn't sit back and watch as the galaxy's most powerful civilizations did nothing. They had to act. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some thought it was madness. Others feared that humanity would be crushed by the unknown enemy. But those who believed in the mission were resolute. They knew that if they didn't try, the consequences would be worse. They could never live with themselves if they stood by and did nothing. As the fleet was prepared, the news spread across Earth. People rallied together, united by the knowledge that they were about to undertake something that no one else had dared to do. The galaxy might be filled with civilizations that were older and more powerful, but humanity had something they didn't: hope. They had the courage to face the unknown and the determination to make a difference. The ships were launched into space, and as they left Earth's atmosphere, the crew aboard each vessel was filled with both fear and excitement. They didn't know what awaited them, but they knew they had made the right choice. As the fleet traveled through the void, they could see the stars ahead, each one a world that might need saving, each one a potential battlefield. The first few days were filled with anticipation. The humans had no idea how they would approach the enemy, how they would defend themselves, or if they could even survive. But they knew one thing: they couldn't turn back. As the fleet moved farther from Earth, the silence of space weighed heavily on them. They had left behind everything they knew, and all they could do was move forward. No one knew what to expect when they reached the front lines. Would they find an enemy as deadly as the legend said? Would they find an ancient power that would crush them within minutes? Or would they find something they never expected? A chance to show the galaxy that humanity was more than just a fledgling species, that they had something worth fighting for. The humans didn't have the answers, but as they traveled deeper into space, their resolve grew stronger. They had made their decision. The galaxy had turned its back on them, but humanity was ready to fight. They would answer the call, even if no one else would. And so the fleet pressed on, leaving behind the safety of their home planet, heading into the unknown, carrying with them the hope of a galaxy that had long forgotten what it meant to stand together. As the days passed and the humans made their way deeper into space, a sense of both excitement and anxiety filled the air. The unknown stretched out before them like an uncharted sea. There were no guarantees, no promises of safety. Every crew member knew that they were taking part in something that might never be written about in history books. If they succeeded, they would be remembered for centuries. If they failed, they would be forgotten. Just another lost fleet in the endless void. The fleet consisted of many different ships, each equipped with whatever technology humanity had been able to gather in such a short time. The ships were small, compact, and far from the most advanced in the galaxy. Some had been built from scrap, others hastily designed with every available resource. They were not sleek, elegant warships like those of the galaxy's more powerful civilizations. They were a collection of human ingenuity, made with what little was available, but they were united by one thing: a shared purpose. The decision to go, despite the odds, was one born of desperation. Earth's leaders knew that they couldn't sit back while the galaxy was in peril. The other civilizations, the ancient and powerful races, had already made their choice. They chose to wait, to watch, and to hope that the enemy wouldn't reach them. But humanity couldn't afford that luxury. They had to act. As the fleet moved further from Earth, they could no longer see the comforting blue glow of their home planet. It was hard to even remember how far they had come, or what they had left behind. Earth had always been the center of their world, and now, for the first time, the crew realized just how small their planet really was in the grand scale of the universe. They were no longer surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of their cities. There were no forests, no oceans, no hills or valleys. There was only the cold, vast emptiness of space. Yet, as bleak as the journey seemed, there was still a glimmer of hope. The decision to answer the galaxy's call was not an easy one. Many had doubted it. Could humanity really make a difference? Could they stand up to the unknown forces that even the most powerful civilizations feared? The skeptics whispered in the corners of the ships, questioning the wisdom of the mission. But the majority, those who truly believed in the mission, remained focused. They believed that humanity had something that the other species of the galaxy didn't. They had something that no amount of technology or ancient wisdom could replace. They had the will to do what others would not. The first few days of the journey were filled with routine tasks. The crew worked together, checking systems, reviewing plans, and preparing for the journey ahead. But as they traveled farther into the dark reaches of space, the mood began to shift. The sense of uncertainty was growing. No one knew what awaited them at their destination. Would the enemy be as powerful as the stories said? Would they be able to defend themselves? Or would they be swallowed up by the galaxy's cold indifference? At night, when the ship lights dimmed and the crew rested, there was a quiet murmur of conversation among the officers and commanders. Some spoke of their families back home, others of their hopes for the future. There was a sense of camaraderie growing, a shared understanding that they were all in this together, no matter the outcome. They were humanity's last hope, and that bond of unity was what would carry them forward. Each crew member had made a personal sacrifice to be there. Some had left behind loved ones, others had put their careers on hold, but all of them knew that they couldn't stand by while the galaxy watched from the sidelines. As the days turned into weeks, the uncertainty didn't fade, it grew stronger. The humans had no choice but to continue, no choice but to press on toward the unknown. They couldn't turn back, and they couldn't fail. Too many lives depended on them. As the fleet sailed deeper into space, the stars outside the windows began to blur into streaks of light, their speed increasing as they neared the galactic front lines. Yet, despite the apparent movement, it felt like they were still standing still, suspended in the emptiness. They began to wonder, each in their own way, whether this was truly the right decision. Was it foolish? Would they be able to handle what lay ahead? The alien races had known about the enemy for much longer. They had more resources, more power, and far more knowledge. And yet, despite all of that, they had chosen not to act. They had waited. They had hoped it would go away. But humanity couldn't afford that luxury. One day, as they neared the edge of a neighboring system, a signal arrived. It wasn't from an alien civilization, as they had expected. It wasn't even from an enemy force. It was a simple message from Earth. It was brief, but it was clear. We believe in you. Don't give up. It was a small gesture, but it gave them something they had been missing: reassurance. As the message was played aboard the fleet's ships, the crew felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't alone. The entire planet, their families, their friends, were watching. Their trust in humanity's resolve was their fuel. It was more than just a message. It was a reminder that no matter how small they were in the grand scheme of things, they were still important. Their actions mattered. The decision to keep going, despite the fear and uncertainty, was the right one. They were on the path to making history. With this newfound resolve, the fleet pushed forward. The dark emptiness of space now filled with the quiet hum of determination. The galaxy had turned its back on them, but humanity had not given up. They would not turn back. They would continue their journey and answer the call, no matter what. They had already taken the first step, and that step was the most important one of all. The next challenge awaited them, but they were ready. The fleet continued its journey through the vast and silent expanse of space, the stars stretching out like distant beacons, each one a reminder of just how far they had come. Days turned into weeks, and the initial excitement that had fueled their mission began to fade, replaced by the heavy weight of uncertainty. The unknown loomed ahead, and with each passing moment, the crew members felt the growing realization that they were venturing deeper into uncharted territory. Yet, despite the unease, a quiet determination held the fleet together. As they approached the outskirts of the galactic frontier, the crew started to wonder what awaited them. The enemy had never been clearly defined, only described in fragmented reports and rumors. Some spoke of an ancient force that had lain dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Others whispered that it was something far worse: an intelligent, malevolent presence that could bend entire star systems to its will. But no one knew for certain. The galaxy's greatest civilizations had chosen not to investigate, content to ignore the threat as long as it didn't reach them. And yet, here they were, humanity's last hope, carrying the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Every ship in the fleet had its own crew, each one with their own doubts and fears. They were just ordinary people, with families and lives waiting for them back on Earth. No one had asked them to go. They had volunteered, driven by a sense of duty and an overwhelming belief that they could make a difference. But as the days passed, the fear of the unknown grew. What if they weren't strong enough? What if their technology wasn't advanced enough to face whatever lay ahead? As the fleet moved closer to the danger zone, the crew had begun to settle into a routine. They spent hours monitoring the sensors, scanning for any signs of the enemy, yet nothing came. Silence filled the ships, silence that felt almost oppressive, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The days grew longer, and the crew started to feel the weight of isolation. They were far from home, cut off from everything they knew. They had no way of knowing what was happening on Earth, no way to communicate with their loved ones. All they had were the messages of support, and even those felt like distant echoes in the void. It wasn't long before the unease began to affect morale. Crew members who had once been hopeful began to question their mission. The long stretches of silence in space began to take their toll. There were whispers about turning back. They had made it this far, hadn't they? Maybe it was enough. Maybe they should leave this threat to the more powerful civilizations. But even in the face of doubt, the core group of believers in the fleet held strong. They reminded each other why they were here, why they couldn't turn back. They had made a promise to the galaxy, to Earth, and to each other. They couldn't afford to fail. And then, one morning, the silence was broken. A signal appeared on the fleet's sensors. It was faint, distant, and seemed to be coming from a nearby star system. The crew sprang to attention, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. The signal was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't from any known civilization, nor was it a distress call from one of the planets they had passed. The signal was strange, almost alien in nature. It was a sequence of patterns, too complex to be random, but too faint to analyze clearly. For a moment, it felt like everything had come to a halt. The ships hovered in place, the crew staring at their screens, unsure of what to do. Was this the enemy they had been warned about? Or was it a sign of something else, something they couldn't yet understand? They sent a response, a simple message. We are humanity. We are here to help. Can you hear us? The fleet waited, eyes glued to the monitors, hoping for some kind of reply. Minutes passed, then hours. No response came. The silence returned. Frustration began to set in. They had no answers, no guidance. The crew was once again left to wonder if they were chasing shadows. Was this a trap? Was it a trick meant to draw them in and isolate them? Or was it something more? No one knew. But the longer they waited, the more the uncertainty gnawed at them. In the midst of the silence, Commander Daniels, one of the senior officers, called a meeting with the fleet's leaders. They gathered in the observation room of one of the ships, a small, sterile space with a view of the endless stars. The mood was tense. There were still many unanswered questions, and time was running out. "We can't wait forever," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The signal might not lead to anything, but we can't risk just sitting here, doing nothing. We have to keep moving forward. If we wait too long, we'll be too far behind to make a difference." The other officers exchanged looks. The fear was palpable. But Daniel's words struck a chord. They had come this far. They couldn't afford to stop now. "We need to take a closer look," another officer said. "If this is the enemy, we have to find out what we're up against. If it's something else, then we have to know what we're dealing with. Either way, we don't have the luxury of time." A plan was quickly formed. The fleet would press on toward the source of the signal. They would split into smaller groups, each one focusing on different approaches to investigate. The ships were not equipped for battle, but they had something the others didn't: determination. They would take whatever precautions they could and move forward. The engines roared to life as the fleet changed course, heading toward the unknown. With each passing moment, the tension aboard the ships grew, but so did the resolve. They were committed now. They had to see this through, no matter the cost. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. As the fleet continued its journey, they knew that whatever they would find at the end of their path would change everything. Would they find an enemy that could threaten everything they had ever known? Or would they find something that would make their journey all the more meaningful? Whatever the outcome, they had made a decision. They would press on. The galaxy may have turned its back on them, but humanity would not back down. They would be the ones to answer the call. The fleet moved steadily onward, the tension among the crew becoming almost tangible. As they neared the source of the mysterious signal, the atmosphere aboard the ships grew increasingly heavy with anticipation. Each crew member was acutely aware that the moment of truth was approaching. They had ventured far beyond the safety of Earth, and now they were in the heart of the unknown. The stars outside the windows appeared to stretch endlessly, and the dark vastness of space seemed to hold its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. Commander Daniel stood at the observation window of his ship, staring out at the endless expanse. The signal had grown slightly stronger, but still no clearer. It was a strange feeling, this sense of moving toward something that neither they nor anyone else fully understood. There were no guarantees, no assurances that they would even survive what lay ahead. They were racing against time and the unknown, and every moment felt like a fragile thread holding them together. In the quiet of the ship, the crew went about their tasks. The hum of the engines was the only sound that broke the stillness, a constant reminder that they were moving forward. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made long ago, but as they got closer to their destination, that decision felt more and more like a heavy burden. Every crew member knew that their actions in the coming days would either save or doom their world. Earth was counting on them. As they approached the coordinates of the signal, the ships began to slow, their engines powering down as they entered a large asteroid field. The signal was coming from the other side, but the path was fraught with dangers. The fleet had to navigate carefully through the maze of rocks and debris. Each ship was equipped with specialized sensors to detect obstacles, but even the best technology couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't encounter unexpected dangers. Every crew member was on edge, fully aware that the smallest mistake could spell disaster. The fleet leader, Commander Daniels, issued orders for the ships to proceed slowly and methodically. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that couldn't be ignored. "Everyone stay alert," he said over the intercom. "We're entering uncharted territory, and we don't know what's waiting for us. Keep your sensors active, and don't take any chances." As the ships carefully made their way through the asteroid field, the crew members worked in silence, their eyes glued to the screens, watching for any signs of danger. Outside, the jagged rocks drifted by, some large enough to block their path. The ships maneuvered nimbly, carefully avoiding the obstacles. The process was slow and tedious, but it was necessary. There was no room for error. Hours passed as the fleet carefully threaded its way through the field, and just as the last of the asteroids passed by, a new signal emerged on the ship's screens. This one was different. It was clearer, more distinct. It wasn't the faint, fragmented pattern they had been tracking for days. This was something else entirely. A structured message, one that could be deciphered. The crew went silent, each person leaning forward, watching as the message came into focus. The message wasn't in any language they recognized. The symbols were unfamiliar. And for a moment, it felt like they were staring at an impossible puzzle. But the team of linguists and communication specialists worked quickly, decoding the symbols one by one. Slowly, the message began to take shape. It was a warning of sorts, though its true meaning was still unclear. The language was alien, yet there was an unmistakable tone of urgency that transcended any barriers of communication. It was as if the message had been sent with the intent to reach them, specifically. It was a cry for help, or perhaps a warning to stay away. Commander Daniels gathered the senior officers on the bridge to discuss the message. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation, but no one knew what to make of the message. "It's a warning," said one of the officers, "but we don't know what it's warning us about." "We can't turn back now," Daniels replied, his voice steady but firm. "We've come too far to abandon this mission, but we need to prepare for anything. Whatever's out there, we have to be ready to face it." The crew spent the next few hours analyzing the message, trying to understand what they were dealing with. But as they delved deeper, the meaning of the symbols seemed to shift, as if they were not meant to be understood in a linear fashion. The patterns were complex, layered, almost as if the message itself was encoded with multiple levels of meaning. It was clear that they were dealing with something far more advanced than humanity's own technology. And yet, it was also evident that the message had been sent with them in mind. Despite the confusion, one thing was certain. They had to press on. As the fleet left the asteroid field behind, they emerged into a new region of space, one that was unlike anything they had encountered before. The stars seemed dimmer here, the space around them darker and colder. The vastness of the universe had never felt more oppressive. And in the distance, far ahead of them, was a strange sight, a massive, swirling nebula, glowing with an eerie light. It wasn't like any nebula they had studied before. Its colors were unnatural, its structure irregular. It seemed alive, pulsing with a strange energy that sent a chill down the spine of every crew member who gazed upon it. Commander Daniels watched the nebula from the bridge, his mind racing. "That's where the signal is coming from," he said quietly. "We have no choice but to go in." As the fleet moved closer to the nebula, a strange sensation filled the air. It was as if the space around them was shifting, warping in ways that defied the laws of physics. The ship's sensors began to malfunction, their readings growing more and more erratic. The crew scrambled to adjust, trying to make sense of the strange forces at play. Some of the ships began to drift off course, pulled by the unseen force within the nebula. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the ships were jolted back to normal. The malfunction ceased. The nebula remained ahead, still glowing with its eerie light. "Prepare for entry," Commander Daniels ordered. "We're going in. Stay focused and be ready for anything." As the fleet moved forward, a deep sense of unease settled over them. What lay within the nebula? Was it the enemy they had feared? Or was it something even stranger, something beyond their understanding? The galaxy had turned its back on them, but now they were about to confront something that no one had ever dared to explore. Whatever awaited them inside the nebula, they knew one thing for sure. Humanity was ready to face it. As the fleet drew closer to the heart of the nebula, the eerie glow grew more intense, bathing the ships in an unnatural light. The closer they got, the more it felt as if the very fabric of space was bending around them, stretching in ways that defied reason. The ships moved cautiously, their engines humming softly as they entered the swirling clouds of gas and energy. The crew felt a strange pressure building, an almost palpable weight in the air, as if the universe itself was watching them. Inside the ships, the crew members worked in tense silence. The usual sounds of chatter and movement were replaced by the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional hum of machinery. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. The vastness of space, once a comfort and a symbol of exploration, now felt like a cold and empty void. No matter how far they traveled, no matter how many light years they crossed, the crew could never escape the feeling that they were alone. And yet, they pressed on. The nebula loomed ahead, its swirling colors shifting and pulsing like a living thing. It was mesmerizing, beautiful in a way that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The closer they got, the more the ship's instruments began to behave erratically. Sensors that had always been reliable began to flicker, displaying strange, unreadable data. Communication systems crackled with static, making it difficult to hear anything at all. The fleet was plunging deeper into the heart of the unknown, and every step forward felt like a leap into a world where the rules no longer applied. Commander Daniels stood at the helm of his ship, watching the view screen with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "This is unlike anything we've ever encountered," he muttered under his breath. He could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of responsibility on his shoulders. They had come this far, but now, as they neared the center of the nebula, he couldn't help but wonder what they were truly up against. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp tone from the communications officer. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission. It's faint, but it's coming from deep within the nebula." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Can you make it out?" The officer leaned forward, adjusting the frequency. "It's not in any known language, sir, but there's a definite pattern to the signal. It's It's almost like it's trying to communicate with us. The crew fell silent. Could this be what they had been searching for all along? Was this the answer they had hoped for? Or was it another mystery? Another enigma wrapped in layers of complexity? Daniels clenched his jaw, his mind racing. They had no choice but to investigate further. "Prepare to intercept," he ordered, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "We need to get a closer look. All ships, stay within range. We move as one." As the fleet moved deeper into the nebula, the strange signal grew stronger. It wasn't just a simple message. It felt almost as if the nebula itself was alive, pulsing with energy, as though it were reaching out to them. The ships flew through the cloud of gas and dust, weaving their way through the dense, shifting clouds. The colors outside the windows were surreal, shades of violet, blue, and green, swirling and blending together in a kaleidoscope of light. It was beautiful, but it also felt wrong, like they were stepping into a place where they didn't belong. Minutes stretched into hours, and the closer they got, the more the fleet began to feel a sense of foreboding. It wasn't just the strange signal or the odd behavior of their instruments. It was the feeling that something was waiting for them, watching them from the darkness within the nebula. The atmosphere on the ships grew heavier, the silence growing oppressive as the crew continued to push forward into the unknown. Then, without warning, a bright flash of light filled the viewports. For a split second, everything went white, blinding and disorienting. The crew shielded their eyes, and when the light faded, they found themselves staring at something they could never have imagined. At the center of the nebula, in the very heart of its swirling clouds, was a massive structure, its shape difficult to make out at first. It seemed to float effortlessly within the center of the nebula, its surface gleaming with an otherworldly light. The structure was immense, far larger than any ship they had ever encountered. It appeared to be made of some kind of metal or material that shimmered and pulsed, reacting to the energy of the nebula around it. The ship wasn't just stationary, it was alive, or at least it gave the appearance of being so. The fleet slowed, hovering in place as they took in the sight. The sheer scale of the structure was incomprehensible. It was a colossal tower, stretching up toward the heart of the nebula, with tendrils of energy reaching out like fingers, entwining with the swirling gases around it. The structure seemed ancient, yet strangely advanced, as if it had been built by a civilization far older and more powerful than anything humanity could imagine. "Is that?" one of the officers whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Is that the source of the signal?" Daniels nodded slowly, his face tense with a mixture of awe and fear. "It has to be. This is what we've been searching for." But as the fleet continued to hover, another realization began to settle in. The closer they got to the massive structure, the more the ship's systems began to malfunction. The screens flickered and buzzed, and the once steady hum of the engines grew erratic. The ships were being affected by the strange energy emanating from the structure. It was as if the very fabric of space around them was warping, bending in ways they couldn't understand. "Report," Daniels barked, his voice snapping through the tension-filled air. "We're losing power," the chief engineer responded, his voice trained. "Something in the structure is interfering with our systems. We're not sure how much longer we can stay in this proximity." "Get us out of here," Daniels ordered. "We can't risk losing control." "Full reverse. All ships, back up now." But just as the fleet began to retreat, a deep, resonant hum echoed through the ships, vibrating through the hulls. The signal intensified, now almost deafening, filling the entire space with its sound. The hum was like a song, ancient and powerful, vibrating with energy. And then, without warning, the energy reached out, flooding the ships with a pulse of power so strong it seemed to shake the very stars themselves. For a moment, it felt as though the universe itself was bending. And then, silence. The fleet hovered in place, shaken, the stars around them now eerily still. The strange structure had not moved, but the energy seemed to have shifted, focused entirely on them. It was clear now that whatever lay within the nebula, it had made contact. It was waiting for them to understand, to unlock the mystery it had been holding for so long. And for the first time, Commander Daniels felt a sense of dread. They had come so far to find this, but now that they were face to face with it, the reality of their situation settled in. This was no longer just about saving humanity. This was about something far greater, something that no one had ever fully understood. The truth of the galaxy's history, the forces that shaped it, were now right in front of them, and they had no choice but to face it. The ships drifted in the quiet stillness of space, surrounded by the glowing heart of the nebula. After the wave of energy had passed, everything seemed silent, almost peaceful. But it was the kind of silence that didn't bring calm. It brought tension. Every crew member felt it. Something had changed. The structure in the center of the nebula still hovered, untouched, glowing faintly, but now it felt aware. Inside the command ship, Commander Daniels sat quietly in his chair, watching the shimmering tower on the screen. He had faced many unknowns in his years of service, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the mystery of the signal or the strange structure. It was the sense that something was about to happen. The calm wasn't real. It was only waiting. Suddenly, without warning, the ship's main lights dimmed. Not off, just low enough to create a strange atmosphere. A soft tone echoed through the control room. Not an alarm, but a signal. Every screen on the bridge flickered, then slowly displayed a single glowing symbol. It wasn't in any known language, but somehow it felt familiar. The communications officer leaned closer to the console. It's broadcasting directly into our system, but it's not using data. It's using light patterns. Daniels narrowed his eyes. Patterns. Yes, sir, the officer replied. Flashes, pulses, colors. It's trying to show us something. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then the science officer said slowly, I think it's not just communication. I think it's trying to teach us something. The strange light patterns on the screens began to repeat, slowly at first, then in shorter loops. The pulses formed shapes, circles, lines, spirals, and with each pattern, the crew began to notice something strange happening. Their minds felt clearer, thoughts came faster, ideas connected more easily. It was like something in the patterns was helping them think in new ways. Daniels felt it too. A thought formed in his mind, not words, but a deep understanding. The structure was ancient, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. It wasn't made by one species, but by many, working together in a time long forgotten. The tower was a message, a memory, and a test. Outside, the nebula shifted again. A ring of soft white light appeared around the structure. It looked like an invitation. Commander, said the navigation officer, there's an open path forming. It's guiding us toward the structure. Daniels stood slowly. He didn't know exactly what waited for them, but he understood now. They hadn't just been brought here to observe. They were meant to go inside. Prepare the shuttle, he said calmly. We're going in. Within minutes, a small exploration shuttle detached from the main ship and drifted toward the glowing path. The larger ships remained behind, watching closely, scanning the area for any signs of danger. But there was none, only that strange, calming light. Inside the shuttle, Daniels and a small team sat quietly, watching as the nebula's colors shifted around them. As they neared the structure, it became clearer. It wasn't just a building. It was like a library, a vault of knowledge made from energy and metal. Strange symbols ran across its surface, glowing softly. As they approached, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a smooth tunnel of light. The shuttle entered slowly. Inside, the walls were covered in moving images, scenes from across the galaxy, memories of different worlds, species, and moments in time. It was like walking through a dream. The shuttle landed in a large open chamber. As the crew stepped out, the images around them changed. Now they showed Earth, its mountains, its oceans, its cities. Then came images of humanity's space travel, its challenges, and finally, its decision to answer the call that no other species had. Daniel stared at the glowing display in silence. The tower had been waiting for someone who would not ignore the call for help. And humanity, against all odds, had come. Just then, a new image appeared. It wasn't a memory. It was something new, a vision of the future. Ships of different species flying together, working side by side. New planets, shared knowledge, peace. The tower wasn't just a test. It was a gate, a place to choose the future of the galaxy. And it had chosen humanity to begin it. Back on the command ship, the crew watched as the tower's glow brightened, sending out a signal across the stars. It wasn't just light. It was an invitation. To all. Something had begun. Something far greater than anyone had expected. The light from the ancient structure continued to pulse gently, like the calm rhythm of a heartbeat. It spread through the nebula, creating waves of soft, colorful light that reached far into the darkness of space. Back on the command ship, the crew watched in silence. No alarms, no fear, only a growing feeling of awe and purpose. They all sensed it now. This was a turning point not just for their mission, but for all of humanity. Inside the tower, Commander Daniels and his team stood in the glowing chamber. The images around them had shifted again, now showing faces, some human, some alien, all unfamiliar. But there was something peaceful in their expressions. These were the ones who had come before, long ago. The tower was not only a machine or a structure, it was a memory keeper, a place built to protect knowledge, to share it only when someone was ready. Then, the floor beneath them lit up. A soft hum filled the air, not loud, just enough to make their footsteps feel lighter. The walls formed new shapes, slowly turning to create a circular chamber. At its center, a column of light rose upward, stretching toward a ceiling that wasn't visible. It felt endless. The crew stepped closer, unsure of what they would find. But they weren't afraid. As Daniels reached out, the light wrapped gently around his hand. It was warm, almost like sunlight. And then something changed. Not outside, but inside their minds. Thoughts came quickly, clearly, not in words but in feelings, visions, and meaning. They saw what the tower wanted to show them. The galaxy once had unity. Long ago, different civilizations had worked together, building bridges of knowledge and friendship. But over time, fear and pride had broken those bridges. The tower was left behind to wait, to test, to see if anyone would rise, not with force, but with courage, empathy, and hope. Humanity's choice to answer the call, despite having little to gain and no promise of reward, had proven something powerful. In a galaxy full of silence, they were the first to listen. And now, the tower was ready to open again. Suddenly, a new structure rose from the floor, smooth, metallic, shaped like a ring. Inside it, swirling patterns of stars and planets appeared, like a window to distant places. It was a map, but not of just one part of the galaxy. It showed everything. And glowing on that map were hundreds of tiny lights, other towers, other keys scattered across the stars. Daniels and his team stood quietly, taking it all in. They had been given a gift, not just knowledge, but trust. A quiet message formed in their minds. The galaxy waits. Others will follow, but someone must lead. Daniel slowly turned to his crew, and for a long moment, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The meaning was clear. Back on the main ship, the tower's signal had already begun spreading. Through the nebula, through the systems beyond, reaching places where hope had faded. It was more than just a call. It was a beacon. And on Earth, months later, telescopes captured the moment when that beacon appeared in the sky. A soft, pulsing light. Humanity had gone looking for help. And instead, they had become the answer. Now, with the path revealed, they were no longer alone. A new journey was beginning. A journey not just through space, but through understanding, through connection, through the quiet rebuilding of a once great unity. And it all started with the choice to say yes.